very warm welcome to Rocking the Journey, the podcast from Rock My Age. I'm Debbie Binner, and today, as part of our series on wisdom, I will be speaking to Rabbi Jonathan Romain. Jonathan is a really interesting figure. He is the minister at the Maidenhead synagogue, and he's a prolific broadcaster and writer. He's a familiar voice on the BBC, and he writes for most of the national newspapers. My interest in Jonathan has been the material that he's written and spoken about around humanity and community and interfaith issues. He talks a lot about all the things that make us human and all those situations that all of us can relate to. So it isn't just about religion or being in a particular faith or not. I've drawn great solace from Jonathan's work in the difficult times I've had in my life. And I had the absolute pleasure of meeting him a couple of years back in an interfaith event, which we will talk more about. Now, another thing I really like about Jonathan is he is bold and courageous, and he really doesn't mind tackling the more controversial issues that you wouldn't normally associate with a religious leader. Among them is he is pro-assisted dying. He wants to open up faith schools to other people, other religions, and he's very in favor of interfaith marriages, relationships, and perhaps most controversially of all, he stepped into a political debate last year when he urged the Jewish community not to vote for Jeremy Corbyn. So lots and lots to speak about. But really, I hope from this interview, we will get more about his thoughts about what it is to be human, how we can all live better in community, how we might be able to bring more rituals into our life, even though we live in a more secular society now, and how we might draw on some of the ways that religious people live, not just in Judaism, but across faiths, to make our own lives richer and more connected. So I'm really excited about this conversation. I hope we can, it'll be something that you enjoy and maybe get some practical advice from too. Okay, so just waiting for Jonathan to join the call now. So Jonathan, welcome to the Rock My Age podcast. Really lovely to see you here. So,
to be with you.
And you are our very first man that we've spoken to. So our very first thought leader who is the man. So very, very special place for you. So Jonathan, as I said in my pre-talk, you are somebody who I followed for quite a long time. And in the difficulties of my life, your words have given me quite a lot of solace and a kind of spiritual richness to them, which has really helped me. So that's probably one of the main reasons why I wanted to talk to you. Also because I think you're a bold, courageous thought leader, and that really appeals to me as well. And as I was saying before, I think a lot of your wisdom and the things you say transcend faith. And again, I think that humanity is something that is very relatable to not just people in the Jewish faith, but in lots of different faiths as well. So your words of wisdom on living a good life is what I'd be really interested today. But first of all, tell me, you're a rabbi in Maidenhead, and you are known as a progressive liberal rabbi. What does that mean?
Right, I should say, by the way, I feel neither wise nor spiritual. So, but there we go. I see myself more as sort of very hands-on and getting involved in the sort of the nitty-gritty muddiness of life, which can be pretty messy at times, as you know, and I'm sure that many of your listeners will know. But yeah, Maidenhead is a lovely place to live in, by the way, just in Berkshire.
I know.
Yeah, you fly over it every time you leave land at Heathrow, and. As you rightly say, I'm a Reform rabbi officially from the progressive wing. but to essentially, just like the church is divided into sort of Catholics and Protestants and other groups, and you get Sunni and Shia Muslims, so Judaism has different groups, and the two main blocks, if you like, are the Orthodox, which are sort of the more traditional, and the Reform or liberal or progressive, as we're sometimes called. And what we try and do is to marry the best of the traditions of the past with the realities of today. And it's all about the C word, change. How much can you change? And if you're a traditional believer, whether it's Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, then by and large you don't change much. But as if you belong to the more sort of reformist or progressive elements of all three phase, then you're open to change, like women's involvement in the services, which for me is like obvious, but is a no-no for many others. Or like welcoming gay and lesbian couples, and saying they are just as much the children of God. They were created gay by God, if you like. So how can we deny them their equality? And it's just, again, it almost feels embarrassing to say that because I think it's just so obvious. But of course, for many people, it isn't. So it's the ability to try and say the core values are still there, but we have to adapt and learn. And, we do know better than some of the people of the past. The Orthodox, again, of the all phase would say, no, there's the giants of the past. But actually, we have better knowledge and better insights. And we need to marry the two together.
So just talking about women particularly, because our audience is an all-female audience. So what is the role in Judaism? What are the issues, the female issues, those kind of top female issues?
Well, if you go into an Orthodox synagogue, for instance, they are, men and women are separated, and either men at the front and women at the back. Gosh, what does that say? Or men downstairs and women upstairs. Whereas, and it goes back, to be honest, not so much discrimination against women, but it was just separate women's roles in ancient times. But you and I know that it's changed. And therefore the Reform synagogues have said, well, it must change not just in the wider society, but in religious society too. So women and men sit together. Women can take services. Women can be rabbis. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but my wife is a rabbi. And
I didn't know that.
I always tell the Guinness Book of Records because we were actually the first two rabbis to marry, male and female rabbis, that is. So women are completely equal, and as you know, there's nothing a man can do that a woman can't do. And it's just, again, I feel I'm sort of saying the obvious, but it's just remarkable, and to me also quite sad that there are many churches and mosques and synagogues where that isn't the case. The women do feel second-class citizens. In fact, we took some of our teenagers from our religion school to see an Orthodox synagogue. So I wanted to broaden their horizons, so they didn't just know our brand of Judaism, but could experience other brands too. And they came back incandescent with rage because the girls were upstairs and they said, what are we? In a zoo, behind bars, so to speak. Not literally, but they just felt that being segregated had no place in the 21st century. And of course, they're 100% right.
Here, yes. Now, something, as I've already said, which really appeals to me about the way you've written and speak about, is that it is very human and very kind of crosses, it just is all about life and all the difficult things that we deal with in everyday life. And in your very wonderful and hilarious book, Confessions of a Rabbi, you speak a lot about this. So give us a little taste about, what kind of things you come up against as a rabbi in everyday life.
Oh, well, that's a wonderful thing about being a rabbi. Every day is totally different. My dad was a pretty sensible bloke, but he got one thing wrong. He thought that when I was going to become a rabbi, I would be some kind of spiritual ivory tower. But boy, is that not true. And you deal with all the aspects of life, whether it's weddings that go wrong and funerals that get hijacked and people who are malicious. And I've dealt with sort of bigamy, multiple murders, virgin births. I mean, you name it, they throw it at me. And it's a wonderful life in some ways because it's not just the bad things, there's also some very happy things. And I suppose that's one of the things I enjoy. Partly that every day is different and there's no routine, but also you can try and make a difference. I know it's a bit of a hackneyed phrase, but it's only hackneyed because it's true, and you can help people because it's a pretty rough world out there, and there's a lot of people who have difficulties, sometimes of their own making, sometimes not at all, but just the way life treated them or other people treated them, and for me, religion at its best is when it can sort of help them get through this life. I don't have a sort of I don't know, fairy tale view of the world. I think this world is a bit of a jungle, to be honest. And it's up to religion not to sort of wave a magic wand, but just to help people get through that jungle and maybe turn it into a bit of a garden.
And a lovely way to put it. Now, the world at the moment particularly feels very polarized, maybe quite unkind, and certainly less tolerant of each other. So what does the Bible tell us about what's the most important bits of the Bible that would help us in this time, help us live a little bit more happily?
Well, I mean, the Bible gets it right when it says, love your neighbor as yourself. I mean, that's basically it. It's in the book of Leviticus in the Hebrew Bible, and then it gets repeated by Jesus in the New Testament. So, if we want a motto, that's a pretty good one. Trouble is, people don't keep it. We've had it for what, 2,000 or 3,000 years. It's so blindingly obvious, and yet people don't. And I suppose religion is there to sort of bang away and say, yes, I know you want to do this, but it's better you don't. Or I know you don't want to do this, but it's better that you do. And tries to, because we've all got sort of I mean, Judaism doesn't believe that we're intrinsically evil. It just means Judaism sort of sees ourselves as a neutral page, a blank page. And we've got tendencies or inclinations to do good or to bad and be selfish or altruistic. And religion is there to sort of nudge us and say, look, it's actually better to be nice. And by the way, it's not only better for other people, but it's better for you because people will relate to you better. You'll be able to look at yourself in the mirror at night and not sort of shudder. And just try and achieve your own potential, do the best that you can, but also in harmony with others.
Reading
there's a lovely story. Sorry, just to illustrate it, because I know love your neighbors yourself sounds a bit pious, but there's a story about a rabbi comes to a marketplace and he gets told, God whispers in his ear that there's a couple of people there who are going to go straight to heaven when they pass away. And he rushes up to them to see, what special thing they do. And he finds out that they're merrymakers. In other words, when they see someone who's sad, they cheer them up. And if they see two people who are quarreling, they bring peace between them. And that's it. It's as basic and as simple as that. No, high ethereal stuff. It's just getting on with people and doing good and doing the right thing.
So I was reading so being brought up an Irish Catholic, I was reading and I have a real interest in all religions, a real curiosity. And interesting, a story actually, when I was 20, I very sadly lost a friend from an illness. She died of an illness, a Jewish girl, and was so struck by how they did death. So I thought Catholics did death well, but I was so struck by, we went round to the house to each day to support the family. And it was at that moment, I thought, gosh, there's so much that these different religions can teach us to those real life events. And then I was reading Melanie Phillips in the Times this week, talking about Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who very sadly has passed away. And she said that Judaism, unlike Christianity, is useful for everybody because of the way it deals with life. We're not just as Christians think a lot about where we're going next, but that the central essence of Judaism is about how we live. Do you think that's a fair description?
Yes, I read that article. I felt a little bit embarrassed because I don't want to sort of diminish Christianity, which has done wonderful things. But she's certainly true that the emphasis of Judaism is very much on this world. It's a this world religion. And, people often ask, what's going to happen in the next world? And the rabbis just say, we don't know. It's as simple as that. And, to be blunt, no one's ever sent a postcard back, so we don't know. We'll find out one day, probably before we want to. But in the meantime, let's control what we do in the here and now. And although it's fascinating to speculate, actually what's really important is what you do this afternoon, and whether you smile at someone or scowl at someone. And and that's very, very Jewish, in that, and we're not very much into theology. I mean, even sort of, it's about people, not even so much about God. You show your love of God not by prayers and candles, but by the way you treat God's creatures, and that's where we come back to love your neighbor as yourself. It's getting on with people.
Yeah. So I want to move over to a more kind of controversial subject. So something that does really interest me about you is the stance that you take on some subjects which certainly wouldn't be immediately associated with more traditional religions. And I know we met at an interfaith event that you were putting on around assisted dying. And for listeners, my own husband had an assisted death, and I write about it in my book, Yet Here I Am. But I don't want to dwell on that at this point. But so assisted death is something that you campaign for. So explain a little bit more about why you think that's a good thing.
Yes, and initially I took the sort of knee-jerk reaction that I guess a lot of people do, and particularly ministers, are saying, "Oh no, you can't take away someone's life, or someone can't even take away their own life." And then as a congregational minister, I saw more and more people die, and also people dying in pain and agony. And of course, hospitals, and particularly hospices, do fabulous work, but there are still people who die in great pain or great distress. And I thought, this really can't be right. And there's nothing sacred about suffering. There's nothing holy about agony. And I began to think that actually, if people are mentally competent, adults in great pain, and they're terminally ill, in other words, they are already dying. So we're just talking about, do they die today or do they die in 3 weeks? What's the point of them staggering on in pain and distress? And then, of course, there's been a lot of legislation proposed, as you well know, the Faulkner Bill, the Maris Bill. And what impressed me was the safeguards. It wasn't a willy-nilly thing. They had to be mentally competent. It had to be certified by two doctors independently. It had to be a judicial oversight. And I thought, there's a lot of checks and balances. Again, in whose interest do we force someone to live on who is terminally ill and in pain against their will? And then the wonderful thing was, I discovered Oregon. Oregon, as you might know, is where they've had exactly this legislation, and not just that, but for the last 25 years. And so we can know what happens. It's like not actually stepping into the unknown. They've been doing it for a quarter of a century. And we know that there hasn't been a sudden rush of people. A lot of people have been interested, but actually, very few people have taken it up, except those who are desperately in pain. Because most of us will probably carry on till our last breath. Great, that's fine. But for those people whose last breaths are awful, why should we deny them the ability to let go and to say, thank you, God, it's been a wonderful life, but I really don't want to have the last 4 or 5 weeks or whatever it is. And that's why I think it's time that we, as a religious response, allowed people to let go of life if they are terminally ill and in pain.
Now, as at the event I went to with you, there were other religious leaders there, which really surprised me as a Catholic, because it is one of the fundamental kind of beliefs in Catholicism about not taking another life and not taking your own life. So, do you think your voice is unusual in the church, or do you in the religious sector, or do you think there's a growing acceptance that this is possibly, not a bad thing, and probably is drawn from a kindness and a love of humanity now rather than anything else?
Well, initially I was very much a lone voice crying in the wilderness, but as you saw, I'm not alone anymore. I think there's a very big divide between the religious hierarchy, who just sort of feel obliged, but I don't know why, just to stick to the past. And there's much of the past that's great, and much of the past that's frankly pretty awful. And when it's pretty awful, it needs changing. And I'm not quite sure why they're scared of change, particularly, as I said, when we can almost see the future, something I wouldn't dare say about anything normally, but because of Oregon and the 25 years where they've done it very successfully, and even the hospice movement in Oregon, which was dead set against it, now admits that actually it's a good system, and they support it and they work with it, and they will help people who carry on to their last breath, but they'll also say to people who want to let go, this is how you do it. And also a poll after poll after poll shows enormously high percentage amongst the laity. 80% of people think that it should be an option. I give quite a lot of talks about this, and a lot of people will say huff and puff and say, oh, I'm not sure if it's right or not. And I say, well, hang on, what about you? If you were dying, you only had a few months or weeks to go, would you want the option of letting go earlier? And the answer is always, always yes. So it's good enough for you. Why can't it be good enough for other people?
Yeah. So, so other issues that you step into are faith schools and feeling that these should be more open, interfaith marriage that you are supportive of, and perhaps most controversially, you advised your congregation not to vote for Jeremy Corbyn. So, and with that, because as we said before, I think the whole Jeremy Corbyn issue is a whole nother subject and a kind of subject in itself. But I'm really interested as to why you, as particularly getting into such a political arena, and why you felt the need to do this. Where does that come from?
Well, in all four cases, whether it was Jeremy Corbyn, assisted dying, mixed faith schools, or mixed faith marriages, they were just issues that I came across, felt strongly about, but also felt there's a lot of hypocrisy and a lot of hiding, that people sort of time and time again said, oh, we shouldn't be doing this, but don't want to upset the apple cart. Well, apple carts are there to be upset, particularly if they're full of rotten apples. And just keeping the status quo because it's a status quo really doesn't help anybody. And there are some people who feel that if you change the system, the whole structure will come down. Well, no, you can reform it, you can change it, and to preserve it, to protect it. And if you think the whole thing's going to come down just because of one or two issues, then you don't have much faith in your system in the first place. And particularly this applies to religion. I mean, religion's always changed. It's a complete myth that it never changed. And, if Jesus came back today, he wouldn't have a clue what was going on if he stepped into the Vatican. Similarly with Moses, if he came back to a synagogue, he would not know what to do or what to say. And every generation has added its own changes, but that tends to sort of be a bit sort of pussyfooted about changing some of the past bits. And I don't mind if it comes to rituals, but what I do mind is when some of these things affect people detrimentally, and they stop people doing things, or they hurt people. Not allowing women to be involved, and we've seen the torture that the Church of England has gone through, over women and women deacons, women priests, now women bishops, and you scratch your head and you think, why on earth is this? Well, I can't really say much without being rude. So I won't
Please do be. I mean, why do you think it is? Why do you think, particularly in religious, do kind of hang behind the rest of society on these things, on women's issues?
Well, I suppose because it's run by men, has been, and people are scared of change, and change can sometimes be for the better. We didn't change, we never discover, we never have penicillin. We just, there's no need to fear change, but people do, or they fear for their positions, and that's why I speak out. And I get very frustrated sometimes where people hide behind the past or hide behind traditions. I mean, of course, traditions are very valuable, but some of them need to be reformed, because otherwise, then the whole thing becomes corrosive and rotten. And we've seen that, unfortunately. So, and which is why And also, of course, the establishment never likes change, not just religious establishment, but any establishment. I mean, look about, I know balls, I know certain clubs, not cricket club, not allowing women and that sort of thing. And it's just so ridiculous. And no, sorry, I'm in danger of getting moody.
Great advocate for us. So, so the moment the world and things that have happened in America and everything, the world has felt so unsettled with the virus. We're still in lockdown. What words could you give to our people listening about, I guess, what can we learn from this period, and how can we, my platform is all about how we can live better, how we can live better lives and more purposeful, more rewarding lives. And we get a lot of people coming to us saying that they find life very difficult at the moment and quite unsettling, and more unsettled than it has been for a long time. So can you give us some words of comfort or wisdom to...
Well, I'd say two things. Firstly, just a bit of perspective. I mean, all said and done, this generation of certainly British people is actually the lucky generation. I know we're surrounded by COVID, but look, it's the 11th of November. I'm the first generation of my family not to have gone to war. My father was fought in the Second World War. My grandfather in the First World War. My great-grandfather in the Boer War. Every generation has fought wars. We haven't had to. I mean, there've been sort of other wars like in Falklands and Afghanistan and Iraq, but they were professional soldiers. The civilians weren't caught up. We haven't had a blitz. Yes, we've got troubles. Yes, we've got problems. But actually, we should just put it in perspective and say how much worse it could be. The other thing is that COVID has brought out the best of us and the worst of us. I mean, those queues of people fighting and trolley rage over sort of toilet rolls, just ridiculous. and you think, human nature, goodness me. And yet, on the other hand, there's been wonderful neighborliness, and people have done all sorts of things for people living in the same road who they hadn't spoken to for 20 years, but who they suddenly pulled together with. So one thing I would say is be kind. It's actually quite easy, and it's enormously rewarding, not just for other people, for your own sense of self-worth. Be kind. And the other thing is I suppose we need to recalibrate our values. Now, that happened a little bit during COVID at the beginning, when we suddenly realized we could live out without celebrities, and we could live without sort of Meghan and Harry, but we couldn't live out without the NHS or the truckers who drove through the night, or the people who stacked our shelves. We've got to hang on to that. And as we emerge, as hopefully we will, if not in this year, certainly next year, back into what used to be normal, we've got to remember that. And encourage our children that the height of ambition is not to be on Love Island, but maybe is to be a nurse.
Yeah. Jonathan, thank you so much for your time today. And just a little quick reminder that your book, Confessions of a Rabbi, is out. It's published by who?
Bite Back.
And so, and I've read it yesterday, cover to cover. It's a brilliant read. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been really great speaking to you.
Bye for now.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation today, and if you'd like to listen to more conversations with inspiring women, do look at our website, rockmyage.com, or register to have them delivered direct to your inbox. Until next time.